Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. With Philip Nothard and Curtis Hutchinson, bringing you all the chatter that matters.
You know what, Phil? I've just been looking at the top of the show notes, and this is episode 52 of the year. Can you believe that?
I know. We're just past halfway. Yeah, we've still got. Yeah. Busy year so far, and lots more to come as well. We're just chatting pre-show there about other people that have approached us about coming on the podcast, either as a supplier special or as an insight industry leader. So we've got a busy time ahead of us, Curtis. We'll see what we can get to. See if it will be a bumper year for episodes. Something we may need to do a little bit of a calculation on.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a bank holiday weekend. So if you're listening to this over the course of the weekend, hope you're having a relaxing one if you're not working. And if you are working, hope it's nice and busy in your showroom and on your forecourts.
Yeah, and I know there's this weekend is CarFest. I unfortunately couldn't get down to it. It's a little bit south for me, but I got invited to talk there via the EV cafe. So good luck at the event, and the CarFest seems to be that event that keeps on going. But you've been out and about recently as well, Curtis. So still a little bit further south for me, but I haven't got my lead yet to get there. But you had a good week.
It's all happening down south because we recorded the show early last week, and just after we recorded, I went off to the British Motor Show on Thursday. So that ran from Thursday through to Sunday. And I must say, it's the first time I've been. I think this is the fourth year of the event. It's held at Farnborough. It was very, very good. It was busy. It was busy on a Thursday. It would have been even busier over the weekend because obviously school holidays, lots of families there. And it was a great event for wandering around, obviously looking at cars. There were a lot of live shows going on and great for networking as well. So, big shout out to some of the people I bumped into. So there was Phil Jones and Lucy Tugby from Motors. Motors were the headline sponsor for the event. Andy Entwistle, the organizer of British Motor Show, he's the man behind it.
He has,
yeah.
Well, hasn't he?
Yeah, and talking to various people, it was quite clear how the event has grown over the years, and that is really down to Andy and his team. And it's an interesting template that he's got for the show because there's quite a high dealer presence there, and I'll give a shout out to some of the dealers that were there. But you have dealers representing new car brands, and you had dealers there actually selling used cars. So he's really got the dealer community involved in it. Other people I bumped into included industry guru and friend of the pod, Ian Godbold. Mm-hmm. So, Ian was saying how he's got a sort of backlist of Motor Trade Radio podcasts that he's catching up on at the moment. He's got a bit of a backlog.
You'd think he'd be ahead of it by now, wouldn't you, to be fair?
He's been a busy chap because he's been out in Spain doing some consultancy work out there that he was telling me about, which just sounded fascinating. So I think he's been a busy chap. So hopefully over the course of the weekend, he can catch up and hear this. Also bumped into Mark Busby from Hendy, who reminded me that the last time we met was 10 years ago at the NADA conference in Florida. So that catch up was well overdue. So big shout out to Mark there. Vicky Hart, who was it was actually her first full week as head of marketing at Wayland's, because of course she was ex-Hendy's, and you would know Vicky as well, Phil.
Yeah, and I think I remember seeing a selfie with our guru of well-being.
You know what? The first person I bumped into actually in the car park was Stephen Whitten, the legendary Stephen Whitten. So yeah, we couldn't resist having a selfie on the way in, looking a bit like the Blues Brothers, because it was nice.
I did notice that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there was comments about that on the post, but I noticed I didn't see a video of you doing a karaoke as Neil Smith did.
Did he?
And yeah, he's posted, sat in the BYD, doing
Right.
They must have done this karaoke with using the internal speakers and the display on the BYD, singing his heart out. He's now obviously Motivate consultancy that he's involved with, but good voice as well, to be fair to him. So I don't think it's his first rodeo to karaoke, to be fair.
Well, it's probably just as well that Steve and I didn't see the karaoke, because I don't think we would have been able to stop ourselves. But a shout out to the dealers who were there, because Motors had a dedicated used car zone that was supported by Arnold Clark Cars, SM specialists, cars and EV experts, and they were actually selling cars from their stands, and that was getting a lot of attention from visitors, certainly when I was there, and cars that were being sold were being replenished with new stock. So be fascinating to know how they got on. Other dealers there were mentioned Wayland's. They were representing Volvo. Hendy were representing Nissan. There was Sportive Motor Group, who were there on behalf of Fiat. Marshalls was there with Mini, and FG Barnes were representing JQ and Moda. And there was also Ford and Tesla there in their own right. So, there was plenty going on there, plenty of new and used cars to look at for the visitors.
Yeah, no, it's great. And I think this is the first year for Motors, and I suspect they're really looking forward to next year's event. And I mean, that feedback sounds fantastic. And the fact that they're selling cars and massive brand awareness for those dealers as well at the event would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. And so this coming week, we've got a special interview with Darren and Dylan from Cap HPI, slightly different to our usual monthly catch-up with Cap HPI, because what we'll be doing is we'll be looking at trends in the year to date, and of course, having Dylan, we'll be looking at some of the forecasting that Cap HPI are doing at the moment.
Yeah, no, it will be good, and like I say, both Dylan and Darren on who really lead the current and future values. It'll be great to get their view on where we're at year to date, what to expect for the remainder of the year. Touch on EVs. I suspect we won't get away without talking about EVs and new entrants as well. I'm sure we'll bring the conversations around the new entrants into the conversation. So really looking forward to that one next week. So stay tuned for that one as we do that.
You're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors.
So on with the headlines. Headlines this week come from AM, Motor Trader, Motor Finance and Car Dealer, starting with Cox Automotive issues cautious full-year used car forecasts, revised forecast with a modest slowdown in Q3 and Q4. Meanwhile, used car sales jumped by over 7% in July for UK's top 200 car dealers. That's according to CarCondor. Franchise dealers take the lead in UK customer satisfaction survey. And we'll be looking at some research from Bumper on the demographics behind Buy Now, Pay Later. Most buyers would demand a battery health check on used cars. And we'll finish off this week's pod by trying to make some sense of the current state of play of European tariffs on Chinese cars and cars built in China. So looking forward to that one.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. If you're a supplier and would like us to profile your business and reach our audience of dealer bosses, managers and decision makers on one of our dedicated supplier specials episodes, get in touch with Curtis and Philip at motortradradio@yahoo.com.
So as we said at the start there, we've had a lot of interest on people wanting to come on the podcast, but particularly around the interest in our supplier special. Companies already featured in the supplier special have been Checkwick with Nick Pratt there and Auto Chat with Martin Beckers. So as I say, if you do want to get involved and you do want to profile your business, then please do get in touch with Curtis or I. And we can talk to you about what the supplier special section actually gives you as a business. And you can get in touch with us via our normal social feeds or via motortradradio@yahoo.com. That's motortradradio@yahoo.com. So headlines then, Curtis, we've got a few this week.
We have indeed, yeah. So starting with AM Online, the headline there is Cox Automotive issues cautious full-year used car forecasts. So this is some research that I know you've been doing, Philip, there, which is pretty much saying that you're optimistically, you're restating that you're optimistically realistic in terms of your outlook for the used car market for the rest of 2024, and warning against assuming that that strong first half that we saw will automatically continue for the rest of the year.
Yeah, I think we are, as you say, still optimistic that we'll break that 7.4 million used car transactions for the full year, which was still a modest increase on previous years, and it does kind of align in terms of pre-pandemic periods as well. I mean, let's not forget that between 2001 and 2019, that it'll still be a 0.8% increase on pre-pandemic averages. So it is still optimistic, but we're trying to sort of, as you say there, an air of caution that we've had a strong start to the year in Q1, Q2. And now the ZEV mandate and what's happening in the new car market, in addition to the challenges of supply because of the drop production through that pandemic period, is having a knock-on effect now as we sort of go through the second half of the year. There's a lot of focus on new cars, particularly brand new EVs, that isn't happening. They're not being translated through private registrations, which by default doesn't then generate the part exchanges coming into the dealer network, and then as a consequence doesn't create the much needed used vehicle for the retailers. So the ZEV mandate and what's happening in the new car market is now starting to play out and influencing what's happening in the used car market, in addition to we're now in that fourth year of shortage of supply of quality 0 to 3, 0 to 4 year old retailable non-EV vehicles. A lot of the product now coming into the used car market is now starting to increase with EVs coming off contract, hire, lease, etc. into the used car market, which, as we know, are not in great demand at the minute. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit more with Darren and Dylan next week on their special podcast.
Yeah, and I guess it's kind of a double whammy that's affecting the used car sector at the moment, because, as you say, we've still got that shortage of cars that weren't sold during the COVID period and aren't becoming used cars now. And we've got the impact of the ZEV mandate and how that's affecting new car sales and that push of EVs, which, as you pointed out, isn't materializing in large, much of an uptake in terms of retail sales, because they're predominantly going into fleet. And I guess what's going to be particularly interesting around this, and this would have been factored into your calculations, is September. We're just a week or so away from the new car plate, the 74 plate introduction at the beginning of September, and what sort of impact we'll see in terms of part exchanges coming back into the dealer network.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be the key. I mean, the September results are going to define the year, where that's for the new or the used vehicle market. We saw previously where the Motability vehicles accounted for, 1 in 5 in the first and second quarter of the year of new car registrations. Well, predominantly, yes, some of those do generate a vehicle coming back in because, you're replacing a car that mobility driver has been driving, but some of them are new applicants, so you don't generate anything. So you're not generating those natural part exchanges. So again, we don't want to be too pessimistic. I think we're optimistic that we're going to see an uptick for the year. We'll see an uptick in terms of the pre-pandemic averages, but we've just got to be cautious that we're not accelerating quickly towards the 8 million used car marketplace. We're going to finish around that 7.4 to sort of 7.5 million used cars for the year. And the second half of the year is going to be all about managing stock, managing profitability, and those supply channels into the dealer network.
And staying with used cars, the next headline comes from Car Dealer, and it's used car sales jumped by over 7% in July for UK's top 200 car dealers. So this is a bit of context really around our previous story, because this is very much a snapshot of what happened in July. So the data, as I say, comes from CarCondor, and it's their analysis of the top 200 dealers. So that's franchised independent car supermarkets. And what they do is they look at car stock, and they found that car stock in July around the country was 167,700 used cars, and that was actually a month-on-month rise of 7.5% on June's figure. So stock levels clearly going up. How that's how that manifested in sales, that's coming through at the moment. But the story goes on to say that the rise actually marks a sharp U-turn on 3 months of declines in the sale of second-hand cars, with the top 200 posting losses in both May and April. So sales of used cars banked £3.46 billion in July, according to this survey, and that represents an 8.5% rise on June's total revenues.
Yeah, no, and again, I mean, it's an interesting, because this is stock levels, and it'll be interesting to see how this compares with the Motors market view stock levels as well, because it's slightly different in the way they're looking at it. But again, you look at Arnold Clark's there in number one position with 17,196, sitting behind at 8,800. So a big gap between the top two there, and lots of shifts in the market in terms of where they rank. So we're seeing things like, CarShop, obviously we've talked around CarShop with their sale of their sites. Well, that has directly influenced where their position is. They've dropped 28 positions, having an average stock level of 1,000 units now. So again, but we know that CarShop then manifests into that Sytner, because Sytner is obviously the Sytner supermarket element. So yeah, it is interesting how this is starting to play out. And I suppose is it less stock, more stock going across fewer dealers, etc., etc. But some interesting stats there from CarCondor in that. But they do highlight some of the winners, well, not winners and losers necessarily, just the top ones there. But in 200 position, you've got TMS Motor Group with 251 units in stock there, and they've dropped 22 positions. So yeah, lots of movements, I think, within that report there.
Yeah, and that top 200, because it is actually listed at the bottom of the Car Dealer story, definitely worth looking at. We're not going to go through all 200, but
top 200 from Curtis.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be here for the next couple of hours, but it's a fascinating snapshot, because it does list the dealers, the franchise sites, the supermarkets, with the average stock level, and the rankings and how those rankings have changed. So yeah, I do urge you to have a look at the full story.
And heading over to Motor Finance Online and sort of looking at some surveys now, franchise dealers led in UK customer satisfaction. And this is franchise dealers emerged as the most popular choice among respondents, with 46% purchasing their vehicle from these outlets. And this is from an NFDA, which is National Franchise Dealer Association, their findings from its latest consumer attitude survey. As I say, that indicating that the preference from consumers is through the franchise network. So some interesting results in this survey, Curtis.
Yeah, the research was actually carried out for the NFDA by Judge Service, and it was over the course of May and June. And it was what they did was they polled the views of 1,500 motorists and covered a whole host of topics from EVs to dealership satisfaction, and franchise dealers emerged as the most popular choice among those respondents, with 46% purchasing their current vehicle from franchise dealers. And that figure was actually more than double the 22% who opted for independent dealers. Although I'd say that 22% is pretty good going for independents as well. The survey also revealed that satisfaction levels with franchise dealers are high, with 92% of participants having either very satisfied or fairly satisfied experiences. So that is a particularly high ranking, isn't it? 92%.
It is, yeah. And there was a final result there talking about, obviously, that the survey identified as the cost as the primary obstacle to EV adoption, with 55% of motorists considering EVs as being too expensive. But we will get onto a little bit more about that after today's break.
You're listening to all the chatter that matters on Motor Trade Radio. Powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
The next headline comes from Car Dealer, and it is Millennials' most likely age group to spread car repair costs with buy now, pay later. So this is some research carried out by Bumper, and I did help the guys with the press release on this one, so I did actually see the data. And I mean, the data itself was fascinating, because what they were able to do was go back pretty much to day one of their database to see what the average age of customers who use buy now, pay later to fund their car repairs through dealerships. And what they found was that the average age was 43, and that's remained pretty constant, certainly over the last several years, with these owners specifically choosing to spread their costs rather than pay up front or use credit cards. And I guess that's the key to this particular story, because it's spreading those costs rather than potentially racking up credit card charges. So the overall average was consistent across franchise dealers and dipped slightly for independent workshops. At the average age there was 38. But the research went on to have a look at how the age demographic according to customers as they spend more on repairs. And it found that older Generation X owners are more likely to use buy now, pay later for more expensive bills. So the study found that 47 was the average age of buyers using this form of payment for bills costing between £2,000 and £4,000, rising to 49 as the average age for £4,000 to £6,000, and over 50s for bills in excess of £6,000. So again, an interesting snapshot of some of the demographics behind what's driving buy now, pay later.
I mean, they're doing some fantastic work at Bumper. I mean, watching their journey and where they are now. And the insight does go into a little bit further depth of looking at sort of the European market, saying that the UK and Ireland have the youngest average users in Europe, followed by Spain at the age of 45, Germany 46, and the Netherlands at 47. And there's the commentary in the piece from James Jackson, who's the CEO and co-founder of Bumper, saying that when it comes to settling workshop bills, budget-conscious millennials have identified the benefits of spreading their outgoings with BNPL rather than racking up credit card debt, and saying that car owners born in the early 1980s, that's rules me and you out, Curtis.
Yeah, not us.
We'll typically be at the life stage where they have monthly mortgage or rent payments and have a young family. So choosing to spread their motoring cost interest-free over several months makes perfect sense. So, I think, for Bumper, they're doing a fantastic job at the minute and really tapping into the current market for what they offer.
Yeah, definitely. And moving on to the next story, which is from Motor Trader. The headline there is most motorists would demand used battery health check. So this is some research that's was recently carried out by Startline for its used car tracker. And it found that 9 out of 10 motorists, that's 87%, said it is important to have an independent, certified even, used EV assessment to check if previous owners had looked after the vehicle's battery. And this actually resonates with me because certainly when I was at the British Motor Show looking at some of the used EVs on sale, they actually had what the battery life was, in terms of a percentage. And certainly if I was in the market for a used EV, that's probably the first thing I'd look at after the price.
No, yeah, and it's right. I mean, it is. I mean, because at the end of the day, EVs in the mass market is new. This is the key, and it's not like they've been used to what they look for in ICE vehicles, petrol, diesel. These are new. They lack of understanding in many ways, and they need to have that air of confidence around that battery. Because they hear all the stories about battery failure and the cost of repair and things like this. So you can see why this is resonating with the consumers. And interestingly, the in my capacity as the chair of the VRA, the Vehicle Remarketing Association, we held a members meeting recently, which we had a panel discussion from 3 of the providers of battery certification with Clearwatt, Artilium, and Avalue to discuss, the attitude towards it. And we surveyed the members, and the results of the consumer survey through Startline does resonate with what the members felt around the importance of the battery certification. The stories out this week with supporting the Startline findings from Rupert Ponting, who is the vice chair of the Vehicle Remarketing Association, saying that he read the story and the results with great interest, obviously showing that 87% of used car buyers want some form of battery state of health. So that's kind of from a remarketing association, where that's through the dealer network, direct out to the consumer, or through the wholesale or the D-fleet channels. Where do these certificates get done? How do they get done? Who pays for them to be done? And what value does it then add to that vehicle for the second buyer? That either that's consumer or the dealer. So saying that the 50% believe that they are conversant with current state of health checks technology, but indicate that a reasonably large percentage are keeping a close eye on development. So the Remarketing Association felt that their members kind of kept a close eye on what's going on in this space, but kind of weren't 100% up to the technology behind it. So some interesting findings there.
Yeah, and just finishing off on this story, because it does actually point out that the new Labour government in its manifesto actually mentions the introduction of a standardised battery health check. And Paul Burgess from Startline says that, in our view, this would be a very good idea, having a government-backed and approved battery test that provided the information consumers want would be a very real boost for the used electric car market, especially if it was backed by some form of warranty. So, yeah, watch this space. It would be, it will be interesting to see how this pans out, because it's an area of growing interest.
Yeah, definitely. We had at the members' meeting, we had Abdul Chowdhury, who's part of OZEV, which are obviously leading this in terms of the government, and they mentioned that they discussed that. And the big question was, how are they going to mandate this? How are they going to get behind this? How complex it is already. But definitely, as you say, they're going to be very interested. But sticking with EVs, and as Curtis said, two big stories to finish today, and really coming around the European market. And the first story is from AM Online, and it's saying that Brussels drafts final decision to impose up to 36.3%. Unique figure there, Curtis. Fairly
where did they get the odd 3 from?
I don't know. I was going to say that. Yeah, 36.3% duties on Chinese EV imports. And this is obviously coming in the back of that European Commission. The EC have issued this draft and finalised it, and that these are lower than the provisional duties that were announced on the 4th of July and implemented on the 5th of July, according to the Commission statement on the August the 20th. So lots going on in this, and it's an interesting one to try and follow, Curtis.
Yeah, we will try and make sense of this, I promise you, because the initial tariff was 45%, but we'll look at that in the next story. So this particular story from AM goes on to say that the EU also noted that definitive measures must be established within 4 months of the provisional duties imposition. So these could change again, who knows? But we'll know later in the year. But the tariffs are in place now, and it's interesting because it's not just affecting Chinese-owned brands, because within this story it points out that Tesla has received a reduced individual rate of 9%, down from a provisional rate of 20.8%. Because it was classified as a Chinese exporter at this stage, because, of course, some of the Tesla models are manufactured in China and then imported into Europe, even though they're an American owned brand. So it's a bit of a minefield, this one, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think it's going to be very interesting of how this plays out, but more importantly, what the UK do on the back of this, which is still to play. And again, a friend of the podcast, Owen Edwards, who is at Grant Thornton, they're saying that any potential measures will be in force for the next 5 years. Little is changed to tariffs except for Tesla, where the EU believes the company has such large levels of support than other Chinese brands have. So there's an element in this, which is obviously where some of the Chinese manufacturers get a significant level of central government support from China, and therefore there's a belief that they can afford to pay tariffs on those vehicles entering the European market. But yeah, this is getting interesting already, because the follow-up story, which was very quickly followed this week, is in Automotive News Europe. And this is that China's EV makers lose ground in the EU after new tariffs take effect. So this is, you pick this one up, Curtis, where we see a significant push from the Chinese manufacturers in Europe ahead of the new tariffs coming into force.
Yeah, surprise, surprise. There was a big push by the Chinese brands in June ahead of that, the introduction of the tariffs in July. So this particular story says that EU tariffs slowed the influx of Chinese-made electric vehicles in July as the bloc moved to protect its automakers from low-cost competition. So the number of new EVs that Chinese car makers such as BYD and MG registered in the EU last month fell 45%. But as I say, that's against June, which was a particularly strong month for EV registrations from Chinese manufacturers. And this is kind of indicative of what we will see now with tariffs. And I think, from the last story, one of the points that Owen Edwards from Grant Thornton makes is that a number of these Chinese brands are looking to produce locally in Europe. And I should imagine now that the tariffs have been introduced, the EU are going to fiddle around with them and finally decide what level they'll be at. But in the meantime, a number of Chinese brands will be looking very, very closely at establishing manufacturing presences in Europe to avoid those tariffs.
Yeah, there's a lot starting to come out on the back of this, and I think there's been some readjustments to the EV volume penetration for Europe for the full year from some of the commentators across Europe there, because it's going to have that immediate impact until it starts to sort of stabilise and level out a bit as people start to get their head around it. But yeah, I mean, very quickly there is immediate volatility on the back of this one, but from us in the UK, probably watching this one very closely as to what does this mean and what could this mean for the UK, and what the UK do around these Chinese manufacturers, as we did sort of ask and poke with Victor Chang from Amoda and Jaku, didn't we, on our interview with him. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting to watch this one play out.
Yeah, and that's without talking about the American market, because Donald Trump, of course, has threatened 100% tariffs on Chinese EV imports, and he's being supported by Elon Musk, isn't he? Surprise, surprise.
I did hear there's a little bit of bias there, because I think the rumor is that he's also been offered a role to Elon Musk as well.
If I listened to some of their conversation on X, formerly known as Twitter. It was quite a painful hour and a half, and I skipped through most of it. But yes, Elon Musk was actually offered a consultancy role in business in Donald Trump's administration if he wins the election.
If he wins the election is the caveat with this one. Yes. Well, again, lots to. We'll know in November what we know with that one. So it's getting interesting over there, over the pond. So that's it for this week. As I say, hopefully we've crammed a lot into this week's podcast, and as usual, it'll be on your news feed on probably Monday, on Bank Holiday Monday. So we wish you all the best for this Bank Holiday weekend. And those of you who do a bit of catch up on our podcast, then hopefully you're up to date on the podcast by the time you listen to this weekend.
Yeah, and still no sign of the summer slowdown, because the headlines keep coming. But that really is all for now. So many thanks for joining us on the Motor Trade Radio podcast. We're back during the week with that special chat with CAP HPI's Darren and Dylan. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.
Thank you for listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, powered by Motors, the driving force behind multi-site advertising. We'll be sharing all the URLs from this week's headlines on Monday morning. To make sure you receive them, just subscribe to the free newsletter on our LinkedIn page. Just search Motor Trade Radio Podcast.